Have you ever been turned into a joke in your own workplace by people who thought you were not good enough for anything more than small menial tasks I have? At a company party, my boss stood in front of everyone and declared, "Ashley is only fit to make coffee because she doesn't have the competence for real work." Laughter erupted across the room while I stood there, my hands trembling as I held the coffee pot. But what they didn't know was that in that very moment, I began a journey to turn everything upside down. And one day, that same man, the one who once belittled me, was forced to bow his head and leave the company in disgrace. This is my story. Chapter 1. Publicly humiliated at the company party. I still remember that feeling so vividly the moment my name was called out in the middle of the crowded company party. For a brief second, I thought that finally, after all those months of silent effort, maybe someone had recognized the proposal I had worked so hard on, or the presentation I stayed late in the office to perfect. But then, the very next words crushed every bit of hope I had. "Let Ashley handle the coffee. She's not competent enough for the real work anyway." The whole room erupted in laughter. Not the polite kind, but the loud, sharp kind that carried a cruel sense of delight. My face burned. My heart pounded violently, yet my lips held on to that familiar fake smile. For the past 3 years, I had trained myself to swallow humiliation whole, to pretend as though nothing ever pierced me. I walked over to the coffee station, each click of my heels on the floor suddenly weighing twice as much. Whispers and half-mocking, half-pitiful glances surrounded me. There she goes, Ashley always ready to serve. Someone tossed that remark into the air, and another wave of laughter followed. As I poured the coffee with steady hands, one question echoed in my head. When did I become a shadow like this? At what point did all my effort get reduced to nothing more than a steaming cup of coffee? They had no idea that it was me who redesigned the storage system that saved the company from tens of thousands of dollars in fines during last year's audit. They didn't know that the smooth flow of financial reports was because I stayed up countless nights catching every tiny mistake. But no, the only thing they seemed to remember about me was the coffee girl. That night, as the laughter died down and conversations shifted back to luxurious vacations and the rising stock market, I stood silently scrubbing each coffee pot in the break room. The hot water burned my skin, but the sting of humiliation burned far deeper. My phone buzzed. A message from my best friend from college. "How's the company party?" Any drama, I stared at the screen. The drama was me, the spectacle they had created, and I was the unwilling main character. When the building finally went quiet, I sat against the cold wall of the break room. For the first time in 3 years, I asked myself, if I keep staying silent, if I keep enduring, will I eventually disappear completely? That night, I did something I never thought I would. I opened my contacts and scrolled to the name I had avoided for 3 long years. Uncle Dom. The man who had built this company from the ground up, the man who once believed I was capable of changing the world. I didn't know what I would say to him, but one thing was clear. If I wanted to end these buried, wasted days, this was where I had to begin. Chapter 2. The Fateful Call. That evening, I returned to my small apartment, the familiar room with its dim yellow light, the dining table made for just one person, and the box of leftovers in the fridge. I sat in silence for a while, letting the stillness swallow me whole. The humiliation from the party still echoed in my ears, the laughter, the mocking stares refusing to let me go. I opened my laptop and absent-mindedly scrolled through old reports and proposals I had once submitted, all stripped of my name by the time they reached upper management. The faded words mirrored my place in the company, existing, yet invisible. I remembered the day I first started this job. Back then, I believed that if I worked harder than everyone else, if I always did, just a little bit better, someone would notice. But 3 years had passed, and to them I was still just the coffee girl. I leaned back in my chair, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to the name I'd been deliberately avoiding, Dominic Martinez. To me, he was more than an uncle. He was the embodiment of success. He had built the entire company from the ground up, and I could still recall him hugging me after my graduation, telling me I could change the world if only I believed in myself. I had once turned down the chance to work directly with him because I wanted to prove that I could stand on my own 2 feet without leaning on the family's shadow. But now, after 3 years of enduring, I wasn't sure anymore whether I had been right or wrong. I hesitated for a long time, my finger trembling over the screen. Then, before I could think it through any further, I pressed call. 2 rings, then 3. I was about to hang up when that familiar voice finally answered Ashley. "What's going on, kiddo?" Just those 2 words made my eyes sting. How long had it been since someone spoke to me with such trust and warmth? I drew in a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Uncle Dom, I need to tell you something about my work." On the other end, I heard the sound of him sitting down, the silence of someone fully listening, and then I began to speak, pouring out everything: 3 years of being trapped in the shadows, the times my ideas were stolen, the night the entire office burst out laughing at my humiliation. I left out nothing, as though all those bottled up grievances had been waiting for this very moment to be released. Throughout the conversation, he barely interrupted, only letting out the occasional heavy sigh. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Ashley, you've been silent for far too long. You should never have had to endure any of this. But now that's enough. I'll come. We'll face this together." When the call ended, I sat in the dark, my heart still pounding. For the first time in months, it felt like a sliver of light had broken through the heavy wall surrounding me. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain: my life was about to change. Chapter 3: The Meeting and the Plan. That Saturday, the sky was gray drizzles of rain falling lightly. I sat in a cafe near the hotel where Uncle Dom was staying, my hands clasped tightly together, trying to hide my nerves. I didn't know how he would react when he saw the niece he had once placed so much hope in, now revealing the harsh truth of 3 years of suppression and betrayal. When the cafe door swung open, I saw him walk in. He looked older than before, his hair more silver, but his eyes were still sharp and bright as ever. Just the sight of him made me feel as though I had finally found solid ground again. "Kiddo." He called me that, his voice both tender and firm. I stood up, and he pulled me into a strong embrace. No small talk, no judgment. He simply said, "Show me everything." I opened my laptop and laid out the documents I had spent countless nights preparing: emails, proving my ideas had been stolen, performance reviews, unfairly downgraded, and the Henderson plan, the market analysis I had written, but which Christopher had proudly claimed as his own in front of the executives. Uncle Dom flipped through each page, his expression growing darker and darker. When he reached the final report, he looked up and fixed his gaze on me. "Ashley, you're not just some administrative employee. You've been running half of the strategic operations without anyone giving you credit. This isn't just about you being overlooked anymore. This is abuse and sabotage." I bit my lip, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want anyone to think my success came from relying on family. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own. He placed his hand firmly on the table, his tone resolute. "Kiddo, independence doesn't mean letting people trample all over you. You have the talent, and I won't allow that talent to be buried for one more day." We spent the entire morning sitting there, laying out a detailed plan. He told me to gather every piece of evidence and organize it in chronological order. He would use his authority to call a board meeting on Monday morning. "This time, you won't be a shadow. They will see exactly who you are." Leaving the cafe that day, I felt both trembling and exhilarated. For 3 years, I had grown used to silence, to bowing my head, to enduring. But now, for the very first time, I felt ready to walk into that office with my head held high. Not as the coffee girl, but as a woman determined to claim what was rightfully hers. Chapter 4: The Day of Reckoning. Monday morning, I woke up far earlier than usual. Sleep was impossible. My heart pounded my hands, and feet were icy cold, yet the eyes staring back at me in the mirror gleamed with a strange new light. I put on the black suit I had kept in my closet, the very one I had worn only once, for my job interview 3 years ago. This time I wasn't wearing it to ask for an opportunity. I was wearing it to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I arrived at the office earlier than normal, but the top floor hallway was already occupied. From a distance I saw Uncle Dom. His stride was steady, his eyes razor sharp, and the deep navy suit he wore made him look like a general returning to the battlefield. I inhaled deeply, then followed him into the boardroom. The atmosphere shifted instantly as the door swung open. Chatter cut off mid-sentence. My eyes landed on Christopher at the head of the table, his usual smug posture on full display. But when his gaze collided with Uncle Dom's, that smirk faltered, if only for a split second. "Dominic, I didn't know you'd be here today." He sprang to his feet, feigning warmth in his voice. Uncle Dom wasted no words on pleasantries. "Sit down. We have business to address." The room fell dead silent. I took my seat, feeling every pair of eyes lock on me. Some brows furrowed in confusion, others exchanged uneasy glances. They were used to seeing me carrying coffee trays, not sitting as an equal at a strategic board meeting. Uncle Dom stood tall, his voice cutting clearly through the silence. "I'd like to introduce someone. Ashley Martinez, my niece, and as of today, my direct internal advisor." The room froze. A pen clattered to the table. Christopher's face drained of color, his forced smile cracking like brittle wax. In his mind, the pieces must have been falling into place, realizing that the Ashley Collins he had belittled for 3 years was in fact the niece of the company's founder. I opened my folder, my hands steady, my voice unwavering. For the past 3 years, there have been projects and initiatives credited to the wrong people. Performance reviews deliberately altered to undermine capable staff. I've collected enough evidence, and now I'm going to present it all. Christopher's lips pressed into a thin line. The very people who had once burst into laughter as I poured coffee now sat with heads bowed silent, unable to utter a single word. The weight of the moment pressed down so heavily it could have been sliced into pieces. Uncle Dom crossed his arms, his gaze sweeping across the room. This company was built on hard work, intellect, and fairness. If those values have been trampled, then today is the day we take them back. I locked eyes with Christopher, and for the first time I saw him stripped of his arrogance, his confidence shaken. In that instant, I understood the silent battle I had endured for 3 long years was finally entering a new chapter. Chapter 5. The Fiery Confrontation. I placed the folder on the table, each page landing with the weight of a gavel. The room was silent, the only sound the tick of the clock. I stared directly at Christopher, unflinching. "This is the email you sent me asking for data on the Henderson clients." And here I opened my laptop and projected the original proposal onto the large screen as the analysis I wrote clearly time-stamped. Yet in the report delivered to the board, the entire content bore your name. Christopher forced a thin smile. "Ashley, maybe you misunderstood. I only compiled what you had prepared." I clicked to the next slide notes in my own handwriting embedded within the report. "You call this compiling. Did you ever spend a night awake finishing it? Or did you just sign your name over someone else's work?" A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Colleagues who had long thought I was nothing more than the coffee girl now sat in stunned silence, clearly shaken by the evidence. Sweat gathered at Christopher's brow, though he tried to maintain composure. "These things, in a workplace, everyone shares credit. You're just being overly sensitive." I locked eyes with him. If credit was shared, why has my name never appeared in a single report or award? If it was fair, why were the people I trained promoted while I remained nothing more than the coffee girl Uncle Dom? Cut in his voice, low and cold. "Christopher, this company was not built to conceal injustice. I've heard enough. Now everyone in this room will witness the truth." I presented more evidence, performance reviews that had been altered, ideas stolen, and even statistics showing the sharp decline in promotions for women employees since Christopher took charge. Around the table, several faces shifted, unease settling in as memories surfaced of times they or their colleagues had been conveniently pushed aside. By now, Christopher was no longer arguing. He sat rigid, pale, the smug man who once toasted to my humiliation at the company party, reduced to someone watching his throne collapse beneath him. I closed the folder with deliberate calm, my voice steady but ringing clear. You once mocked me in front of everyone, saying I wasn't fit to do real work. But today it's you who must answer. What right do you have to sit in a leadership chair when everything you've built rests on theft? The room erupted into hushed whispers, but no one dared to laugh. I knew then the real battle had begun. Chapter 6. Unexpected Allies. After that meeting, I returned to my desk, my legs still trembling slightly. I thought I would have to face the stares, the whisper comments behind my back all on my own. But only a few hours later, my inbox began to ping nonstop. The first email was from Lisa, the graphic designer, who had rarely spoken to me beyond a polite greeting. She wrote, I heard about this morning's meeting. I have a performance review that Christopher edited. I still have the original version, and it's completely different from the one HR submitted. If you need evidence, I'll send it. I sat frozen, eyes stinging. Just one email was enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. But then came the second, the third, and more. Rachel from Data Analytics shared that her report idea had been stolen by Christopher. Jenny, a former intern, even sent me an audio recording describing how she was repeatedly given menial tasks, while the male interns were handed major projects. With every story I read, the bigger picture grew clearer. This wasn't just about me. This was a system built to suppress women, to erase their efforts, to make every contribution invisible. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, the glow of my laptop illuminating the walls. I organized all the evidence into a detailed timeline, who, when, and how each person had been diminished, sidelined, or robbed of their work. As I scrolled through the long diagram stretching across the screen, it felt as though I had uncovered a dark tunnel we had all been trapped inside for years. But the most surprising thing wasn't the evidence, it was the sense of solidarity. I had thought I was alone, but in truth, so many others had been silently enduring the same. All they needed was for someone to stand up first. And now that someone was me. I typed a single reply to all of them. Thank you. I've read and saved everything. We will not stay silent any longer. Believe this time, justice will be seen. As I hit send, I realized this fight was no longer me against Christopher. It had become us against a broken system, and within that unity, I saw the first real light of hope. Chapter 7. The truth revealed through numbers. The personal testimonies from Lisa, Rachel, Jenny. They were powerful blows, but I knew they weren't enough. If we wanted to bring Christopher down, we needed the bigger picture numbers that could not be denied. I spent the entire week in my small workspace, lining up performance reviews, salary sheets, promotion reports, building them into a meticulous timeline. And when all the pieces connected, the truth emerged stark and chilling. Before Christopher took power, nearly half of all promotions went to women. But under his leadership, that number had plummeted to just 11%. Meanwhile, the turnover rate for female employees had skyrocketed, many leaving with the same reason: no growth opportunities left. I remember sitting there staring at the charts forming on my screen. The red and blue bars were no longer just dry statistics. They were stories of dreams, extinguished, of women silenced and pushed aside. And I knew then I could not allow all of this to be buried under the excuse of office politics. When I presented the results to Uncle Dom, he said nothing for several minutes. He only stared at the pages, his hands clenching tightly. Finally, his voice came slow but resolute. This isn't just a failure of management. This is a betrayal of the very values this company was built upon. It's time to rip the mask off. Hearing those words, I trembled, but at the same time, I felt a strange strength rising inside me. For years, I had been dismissed as the coffee girl, But now I held in my hands the evidence that could topple an entire system. That night I sat in my small apartment, city lights flickering through the window. I knew a storm was coming, but with every number, every line of data I had gathered, I was ready for the truth to explode. Chapter 8. The Confrontation in the Closed Boardroom. That day the atmosphere in the company felt unusually heavy. I followed Uncle Dom into the small boardroom, the very place where I had once sat quietly, scribbling notes, enduring sneers and condescending stares. But this time was different. Today I was no longer the coffee girl. Christopher was already seated, feigning composure. He adjusted his tie, gave a thin smile, and opened with "Ah, Dominic. I'm glad we can finally sit down and clear up these little misunderstandings." But Uncle Dom neither shook his hand nor entertained pleasantries. He simply pointed at the chair across from him and said, "Sit down, Christopher. Ashley has something to show you." I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. On it was the full timeline of personnel decisions over the past 5 years, performance reviews, statistics, testimonies I had gathered. Each line of data was a blade slicing into the wall of confidence he had built around himself. I locked eyes with Christopher and spoke slowly. These are the company's own records. Over 40% of promotions went to women before you took over. After you assumed control, that number dropped to just 11%. And here? I clicked to the next slide are the performance reviews you personally altered in your own handwriting. His face paled, though he tried to force a smile. That's coincidence. You can't draw conclusions from a few isolated incidents. Uncle Dom cut him off, his voice ringing firm. This isn't a few incidents. This is an entire system, Christopher. A system you engineered to eliminate capable women and consolidate power for yourself. I pressed the key to switch slides again. The screen lit up with old emails, Christopher's own words about how some female employees don't fit the company culture, even though those very women had achieved outstanding results. He stared at the screen, his hands beginning to tremble. There were no excuses left. The mask of the model leader was falling right here in the room he thought made him untouchable. In that small boardroom so silent that the ticking clock was deafening, I knew this moment was the turning point. He had no way out. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. The air in the boardroom grew thick after I laid out the evidence. Christopher tried to summon his usual confidence, but every word he spoke trembled. These are just numbers, minor issues being exaggerated. Conflicts happen in every workplace. You're all trying to trap me. But his voice was weak, stripped of authority. Uncle Dom looked at him for a long moment, then spoke slowly. No, Christopher. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is the truth. And the truth is that you abused your position to undermine and even eliminate those more capable than you. You are no longer fit to lead here. I will never forget that moment. The arrogance that had always burned in his eyes vanished, replaced by raw panic. For the first time, he realized that all his manipulation, every clever deceit, no longer held any weight. Christopher opened his mouth to protest, but Uncle Dom didn't give him the chance. He placed 2 folders on the table. One contained a reassignment order transfer to a small branch. Demoted rank salary cut by more than half. The other was a termination letter along with a full summary of his ethical violations. You have a choice, Uncle Dom said. Leave quietly or leave in disgrace. The decision is yours. Christopher's hands trembled as he stared at the 2 folders. He knew perfectly well that if he resisted, every email, every statistic, every testimony would become public record. At last, his face hardened, and he signed the reassignment order. The posture of superiority was gone. What remained was just a man stripped of everything. I sat there watching him leave the boardroom, his shoulders hunched in defeat. What I felt was not overwhelming triumph, but serenity. Justice had been served. This time he could no longer reduce me or anyone else to the coffee girl. That day, when I stepped out of the boardroom, it was with a feeling entirely new. For the first time in 3 years, I felt that I truly existed. Chapter 10. The Change in the Office. The Monday after Christopher left, the atmosphere in the company felt as if it had been given a new skin. His old office sat silent, the nameplate stripped from the door, leaving behind only a cold, empty space. Yet strangely, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like freedom. When I walked through the office, every gaze followed me. There were no mocking laughs anymore, no whispers behind my back. A few greeted me with a sincerity they had never shown before. Women who had once quietly endured now stood taller, their steps carrying new confidence. Rachel from Data was the first to approach me. She said, "It feels like I can finally breathe. We don't have to hide our ideas anymore." Then, Lisa from Design walked up wearing a bright dress she had once avoided for fear of being called attention-seeking. She smiled and said, "Thank you, Ashley. I've been waiting for this moment for so long." Even the male employees, those who had once remained indifferent, now began to look at me differently. Perhaps they too realized they had unintentionally benefited from an unjust environment. I will never forget the feeling in that first meeting when I sat in the chair that Christopher had once claimed for himself. I looked around the table, and instead of tension, I saw curiosity, anticipation. For the first time, I felt that I truly had a voice. And for the first time, the entire room listened. No one called me the coffee girl anymore. Now they addressed me by my real name, Ashley Martinez. And with every syllable, I felt the respect I had waited 3 long years to earn. Chapter 11. A message for the women in the company. I still remember that first meeting after everything had come to light. The room was unusually quiet, not the tense silence of the past, but the silence of anticipation. Every eye turned toward me as though waiting to see what I would do with the power I had just gained. I stood drawing in a deep breath. I had no intention of becoming another boss. I wanted to be the doorway that opened for everyone who had once been dismissed the way I had. For the past 3 years, I began my voice calm but resolute. I have witnessed silence. Not only my own, but the silence of many here. Silence when ideas were stolen. Silence when efforts were erased. Silence when we were dismissed, whether because of gender or simply because we didn't please the person in charge. I looked directly at Rachel, at Lisa, at the faces of my female colleagues who had once shrunk into fear. Silence is no longer an option. From today onward, every person in this room matters. No one will be shoved into the shadows for daring to be smarter, for daring to be different, or for daring to stand up. The atmosphere shifted instantly. I saw their eyes light up as if someone had flipped a switch in a long, dark room. Shoulders that had once slumped now began to rise. I continued, "I cannot change what has already happened. But I can promise this: from now on, every contribution will be recognized. Every idea will be heard. And anyone who thinks they can build power on silence and fear will no longer have a place here." Applause broke out, not loud, but steady, certain. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer alone. I had given back to them what I myself had once lost the belief in themselves and in justice. From that day forward, I was no longer just Ashley Martinez. I became a reminder that sometimes it only takes one voice to change an entire system. Chapter 12. The Final Act. 6 weeks after Christopher's departure, the office had transformed completely. There were no more mocking laughs echoing through the hallways, no more contemptuous glances when I walked by. In their place were genuine greetings, respect, and an atmosphere lighter than we had ever known. I sat in the office that was now mine, the very office he had once treated as his throne. I replaced the heavy curtains with thin white drapes, letting the sunlight pour in. I turned the desk to face the door, no longer a barrier between me and anyone who walked inside. I wanted people to feel welcome, not judged, and yet something still felt unfinished. One final reminder needed to be delivered, not just to Christopher, but to anyone who had ever dismissed women in the workplace. So on Friday morning, I left a small gift on his desk, a sleek stainless steel tumbler engraved with two simple words, "Not qualified." The very words he had once used to make me a laughingstock. He found it. I knew because that afternoon, as he quietly packed the last of his boxes, the tumbler sat prominently on top. His face hardened, his eyes flicked briefly toward the office window, where I stood watching from above. I didn't need to smile. I didn't need to say a word. That was enough. He understood the message. Christopher left the company without flowers, without a farewell party, without even a pat on the back. The door closed behind him in silence. But to me, that silence was the sound of justice. I sat back in my chair, sipping coffee from a new mug, engraved with my own name, and realized I was no longer the coffee girl. I was the one rewriting the rules. Looking back, I realized the sweetest revenge isn't making them suffer the way they once made you suffer. It's proving that I am worthy of respect, that my voice carries weight, that I am strong enough to change an entire system. He left in silence while I stood tall, becoming the kind of leader he could never be. If this story resonates with you, hit the like button to show your support and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Scarlet Vows because there are many more thrilling, true Reddit stories and revenge stories waiting for you. And remember, sometimes all it takes is one voice to change the world.